Your accounts have been temporarily frozen pending investigation, Mrs. Sullivan. Those were the words the bank manager spoke to me over the phone. My son Timothy burst into my study, his face twisted with panic. Mom, what will you do? You can't afford this house anymore. Before I could explain it was just a routine verification for my international transfer, he had already called the retirement community. Within hours, he was packing my belongings into boxes, telling me it was for the best. 3 days later, as I sat in my tiny new apartment, my phone pinged with a notification. $4.2 million successfully transferred to your primary account. I smiled and wondered how quickly Timothy would change his tune when he discovered his inheritance had just disappeared. At 68 years old, I had lived a life most would envy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. After losing my husband Edward to cancer 12 years ago, I picked up the pieces and transformed our modest accounting firm into Sullivan Financial Solutions, a boutique wealth management company catering to high-net-worth clients across the Northeast. The grief had nearly broken me, but the business became my salvation. While many of my friends were settling into quiet retirement, I was flying to Zurich and Singapore, building an international client base and a personal fortune that surpassed anything Edward and I had dreamed of during our 40 years together. Stood at the kitchen window of my Vermont estate, warming my hands around a cup of Earl Grey tea, watching the October leaves paint the mountains in brilliant reds and golds. The property had been my sanctuary for decades. 5 acres of pristine woodland surrounding a restored colonial farmhouse, just 15 minutes outside Burlington. Edward and I had purchased it in our 30s as a weekend retreat, eventually making it our permanent home when the children left for college. Now, as I gazed out at the maple tree where we once hung a swing for Timothy and his sister Carolyn, I felt a deep contentment despite living here alone. The distant sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Timothy's black Range Rover appeared, through the trees, moving a bit too quickly up the driveway. At 43, my son had his father's height and my stubbornness, but little of the work ethic that had built his comfortable life. He managed a branch of the family firm in Boston, an arrangement I sometimes questioned but maintained out of maternal affection and the hope that responsibility might eventually mature him. I met him at the door with a smile. Timothy, what a surprise. I wasn't expecting you until Thanksgiving. He brushed past me with barely a glance, his attention fixed on his phone. Had to cut my Nantucket weekend short, he muttered, dropping his leather weekend bag in the foyer. Boston office issues. Thought I'd stop by since I was driving through. He finally looked up, offering a perfunctory kiss on my cheek. Place looks the same as always. That was Timothy, making even a compliment sound like criticism. Would you like some lunch? I was just about to make a soup. I moved toward the kitchen, hoping food might improve his mood. No time, he replied, following me nevertheless. Just coffee. I need to be back in Boston by dinner. He leaned against the marble counter, watching as I prepared the French press. So, Mom, have you given any more thought to what we discussed last month? I kept my expression neutral while my stomach tightened. You'll need to refresh my memory, I said, though I knew exactly what he meant. The house, Mom. It's ridiculous for you to rattle around in this place alone. 5 bedrooms, all that maintenance, the property taxes. He waved his hand dismissively at the surroundings that held 40 years of memories. You should be somewhere more appropriate for your age. I'm 68, Timothy, not 98. I pushed the coffee toward him, and I manage quite well with Mrs. Abernathy coming in 3 times a week. That's another unnecessary expense, he countered. The Pines has opened a new wing, luxury, senior apartments with all the amenities. Alice Whitmore's mother moved in last month and loves it. The Pines, a glorified nursing home where Burlington's wealthy elderly were tucked away, out of sight and mind. I had visited a friend there once, Marble floors and chandeliers couldn't disguise what it was, a waiting room for death. "I'm not interested," I said firmly, turning to look out the window again. "This is my home." Timothy sighed dramatically. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't maintain this place forever. What happens when you can't manage the stairs anymore? When you slip? On ice clearing the walkway? I hire people for the ice, as you well know." I faced him directly. "Timothy, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." "Are you?" His tone sharpened. "Because Carolyn agrees with me. We're worried about your financial situation, too." That caught me off guard. "My financial situation? What on earth are you talking about?" "The firm isn't what it was in Dad's day. The market's volatile, your client list is shrinking, and you're spending like nothing's changed." He set down his barely touched coffee. "We've seen the quarterly reports, Mom." I almost laughed. The quarterly reports he saw were for the domestic branch only, a small fraction of my business. Timothy had no access to my international holdings, the private equity investments, or the offshore accounts that contained the bulk of my wealth. An arrangement Edward and I had established decades ago as a tax strategy, and one I'd maintained after his death. "The firm is doing fine," I said carefully, "and my finances are not your concern." "They will be when you run out of money and expect us to support you." Timothy's voice rose, his face flushing. "You need to downsize now, while you still have equity in this place. The real estate market won't stay hot forever." I studied my son, wondering when he had become this person, so fixated on money, so dismissive of my capabilities. Had I done this to him by giving too much, or too little? "I'm going to Zurich next week," I said, changing the subject. "A client meeting. I'll be gone for about 10 days. "Zurich?" "Mom, those European trips are exactly what I'm talking about. Expensive hotels, first-class flights. It's irresponsible at this point." I bit back a sharp retort. Timothy had no idea that those expensive trips had built connections worth millions, that his comfortable lifestyle and the trust funds for his children came from my irresponsible international business. "The client covers my expenses," I said simply, which was true enough. Timothy checked his watch and stood. "We'll talk more about this when you get back. I've already spoken to a real estate agent about getting an appraisal on the house." He headed for the door before I could respond. I followed him, a seed of anger sprouting inside me. "You did what?" "It's just an appraisal, Mom. No commitment." He grabbed his bag. "She'll call you next week." "Timothy, that was completely inappropriate. This is my house." He turned, his expression softening into something worse than anger, pity. "Mom, I'm just trying to help before things get bad. You're not as young as you think you are, and financially—" "Well, I've seen the books." "No," I said quietly. "You haven't." He gave me that condescending smile that always made my blood pressure rise. "Get some rest, Mom. I'll call after your trip." And with that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the doorway, watching his Range Rover disappear down the driveway. Closed the door and leaned against it, taking deep breaths to calm myself. Timothy had always been headstrong, but this crossed a line. An appraisal without my permission? Discussions with his sister about my financial state? It was insulting. And yet, beneath the anger, I felt a flicker of amusement. If only he knew. I returned to my study and opened my laptop, checking the status of the transfer I had initiated the previous day. 4 million euros from my Swiss account to my domestic bank, the final step in simplifying my affairs as I approached. 70. The screen showed the transfer was processing, with an estimated completion time of 3 to 5 business days. Standard for international movements of that size. My phone rang. It was my banker, Harold Fleming. We had worked together for 20 years, and he had helped Edward and me set up our first offshore accounts. "Catherine, good afternoon. I'm calling about the transfer you initiated." Is there a problem, Harold? I asked, suddenly concerned. International banking regulations had tightened considerably in recent years. Not exactly a problem, but a delay. The compliance department has flagged the transaction for routine verification. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Given the amount, they need to confirm the source of funds. Standard procedure these days, I sighed. What do they need? Documentation of the original investment, proof of tax compliance, that sort of thing. I've sent the forms to your email. Once you complete them, the transfer should process normally, but your accounts will be temporarily frozen during the verification period. How long will that take? 3 to 5 business days after we receive your documentation. I apologize for the inconvenience, but with amounts over $1 million, this is unavoidable now. After ending the call, I opened the email and began gathering the required documents. The freeze was inconvenient, but not concerning. I had other accounts and credit cards not affected by this particular transfer. Still, I would need to delay my Zurich trip until the verification was complete. The following morning, I had just finished scanning the documentation when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Timothy standing there, his expression grim, a folder clutched in his hand. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the house. "Good morning to you too," I replied dryly, closing the door. "What's so urgent?" He strode into the living room and turned to face me. "I got a call from Harold Fleming this morning." I froze. "Harold called you? Why would he do that?" "Because I'm listed as your emergency contact, Mom. He tried you several times but couldn't reach you. I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls. I had silenced it during a Zoom meeting with my assistant earlier and forgotten to turn the volume back up. Harold had no right to discuss my finances with you," I said, anger rising. "What exactly did he tell you?" Timothy opened the folder and pulled out a printout. "That your accounts have been frozen pending investigation. That you're trying to move millions from an offshore account that might not be properly documented." He looked up at me, eyes hard. "What have you done, Mom?" "I haven't done anything wrong," I replied calmly. "It's a routine verification for a perfectly legal transfer. The accounts will be unfrozen in a few days." "A few days? And what if they find irregularities? What if this leads to an audit? Have you been hiding money? Evading taxes?" I stared at my son, stunned by the accusation. "How dare you? Your father and I established those accounts decades ago, with proper legal advice and full tax compliance." Timothy paced the room, running his hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it momentarily softened my anger. "Mom, this confirms everything I've been worried about. You're making risky financial moves, probably trying to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford anymore." "Timothy, you are completely misinterpreting the situation." He stopped pacing and faced me directly. "Am I? Then explain why you're suddenly moving millions from a Swiss account. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "I'm simplifying my affairs, that's all. As I get older, I want less complexity in my finances." I took a deep breath. "This is none of your business, Timothy. I appreciate your concern, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." "Trust?" He laughed bitterly. "Mom, you've been hiding money in Switzerland, making secretive transfers, and you want me to trust you? No. This ends now." He pulled out his phone. "I've already called Carolyn. She's flying in from Chicago tonight." "You did what?" I felt a surge of indignation. "Timothy, you're blowing this completely out of proportion. No, we should have intervened sooner. You clearly can't manage your affairs anymore." He looked around the room with a critical eye. "And you definitely can't afford this house now. The retirement community has an opening, a nice 1-bedroom apartment in the assisted living section." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "I am not moving to the Pines, Timothy, and I am certainly not selling my home because of a temporary account. Freeze. Mom, he said, his voice dropping to a condescending murmur. You're not thinking clearly. This isn't just about a frozen account. This is about your future security. What if the government seizes everything? What if you lose it all? That won't happen, I said firmly. You don't know that. He was almost shouting now. Look, Carolyn and I have discussed this. We think it's best if you stay with me in Boston until the apartment at the Pines is ready. We'll put this house on the market immediately. I felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath me. You and Carolyn have no right to make these decisions for me. We're your children, Mom. We have every right when you're making choices that threaten your security, and potentially ours. He softened his tone, reaching for my hand. Mom, please, let us help you. I pulled my hand away, a cold clarity settling over me. This wasn't about my well-being. This was about control, about protecting what they saw as their future inheritance. Timothy wasn't worried about me becoming a burden. He was worried about me spending what he considered his money. I need some time to think, I said quietly. Please leave, Timothy. I'm not leaving you alone right now. You're upset and you might do something rash. Like what? Wire more of my own money? I moved toward the door. Go home, Timothy. We'll discuss this when Carolyn arrives. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. But I'm sending a car for you tomorrow morning. Pack what you need for a few weeks. After he left, I sank into my favorite armchair, my mind racing. I had always prided myself on my independence, on building something substantial after Edward's death instead of retreating into widow's grief. Now my own children were treating me like an incompetent child. My phone rang. Carolyn calling from Chicago. I let it go to voicemail. Unlike Timothy, my daughter had always been more diplomatic, but she had also inherited her father's practicality. If she had aligned with Timothy on this, she truly believed I was in trouble. I made a decision then. Sometimes the only way to prove your competence is to let others believe in your failure, temporarily. I would let Timothy think he was right. I would go to Boston, allow him to help me. And when the transfer cleared, when my accounts were unfrozen and the full extent of my wealth revealed, he would understand exactly what he had done. As I climbed the stairs to pack a small suitcase, I thought about the Swiss chalet I had purchased last year, my secret plan for my 70th birthday. A place where I could spend half the year, close to the mountains Edward and I had loved in our youth. Timothy and Carolyn knew nothing about it. Perhaps they would learn soon enough. After all, at 68, I was too old to waste time on those who underestimated me, even if they were my own children. Timothy's black sedan arrived precisely at 9 the next morning. I watched from my bedroom window as the driver, not Timothy himself, stepped out and approached my front door, so he couldn't even be bothered to collect me personally. I smoothed my cashmere sweater, took one last look at the bedroom Edward and I had shared for decades, and descended the stairs with deliberate slowness, my small suitcase already waiting in the foyer. Mrs. Abernathy, my housekeeper of 15 years, hovered anxiously by the door. Mrs. Sullivan, are you sure about this? You don't look well enough to travel. I squeezed her hand gratefully. Martha Abernathy was more friend than employee after all these years, and the only person besides my late husband who knew the full extent of my financial arrangements. I'm perfectly fine, Martha. Just a family matter that needs addressing. That son of yours, she muttered, shaking her head. Always in such a rush, never taking the time to understand things properly. The doorbell rang, and Martha gave me a look that said she'd happily send the driver away if I asked. I nodded for her to answer it. I'll keep an eye on everything while you're gone, she promised. Call me if you need anything at all. The drive to Boston took just under 4 hours. I sat in silence, watching the Vermont countryside give way to Massachusetts suburbs. The driver, a polite young man who introduced himself as Kevin, attempted conversation a few times before sensing my mood and focusing on the road. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said as we crossed into Boston city limits, "your son wanted me to let you know that he's arranged for a storage company to begin packing your non-essential belongings tomorrow. They'll be bringing boxes to the Vermont house in the morning." My hand tightened around my purse strap. "Did he indeed?" "Yes, ma'am. He said to tell you that everything will be properly cataloged and stored until your new living situation is finalized." The presumption took my breath away. Timothy was having my home packed up without my consent, while I was conveniently removed to Boston. I had expected him to try talking me into selling, not to simply proceed as if the decision had been made. Kevin glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right, Mrs. Sullivan? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine," I said flatly. "Please continue to my son's home." Timothy lived in a towering glass high-rise in Back Bay, with panoramic views of the Charles River. The doorman greeted me by name. I had visited often enough over the years, and directed Kevin to take my bag up to the guest suite on the 32nd floor. "Mom," Carolyn's voice called as I stepped off the mow. "Elevator." My daughter rushed forward to embrace me, her familiar perfume enveloping me. At 41, she was the image of me at that age. Same chestnut hair, same determined set to her jaw. Unlike Timothy, she had forged her own path, becoming a cardiac surgeon in Chicago with no connection to the family business. "You look exhausted," she said, examining me with a clinical eye. "Come sit down. Timothy's in a meeting, but he'll be home soon." I allowed her to lead me into the living room, noting the way her eyes scanned me as if assessing a patient. The high-ceilinged space was impeccably decorated in the minimalist style Timothy's third wife had preferred before their divorce 2 years ago. Everything was white, glass, and chrome, beautiful but cold, much like my relationship with my son in recent years. "Tea?" Carolyn offered, already moving toward the kitchen. "Please." I settled onto a white leather sofa that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I assume Timothy has filled you in on his version of events." Carolyn returned, with 2 steaming mugs, her expression carefully neutral. "He said there's an issue with your accounts. Something about an investigation into offshore transfers?" "There's no investigation," I corrected. "It's a routine verification for an international transfer. Standard procedure." She settled across. "From me." "But your accounts are frozen?" "Temporarily, yes. It will be resolved in a few days." "And the offshore accounts?" "Mom, why didn't you ever mention those to us?" I took a sip of tea to hide my irritation. "Because they're my accounts, Carolyn. Your father and I established them decades ago, and I've maintained them since his death. They're perfectly legal." "But secretive," she pointed out. "And now you're suddenly trying to move millions back to the U.S.? It's concerning." "What's concerning is that my adult children think they have the right to monitor my financial decisions." "Mom," Carolyn set down her mug, leaning forward. "We're worried about you. You're almost 70, living alone in that big house, making major financial moves without consulting anyone." "I don't need to consult anyone. I built my international client base myself after your father died. I've managed those relationships and those accounts for 12 years without assistance." "But that's just it. You shouldn't have to. You should be enjoying retirement, not juggling international finance." The elevator doors opened, and Timothy strode in, briefcase in hand. He looked surprised to see me sitting there, as if he'd half expected me to refuse the car he'd sent. "Mom, good, you're here." He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. "How was the drive?" "Illuminating," I replied coldly. "I learned that you've arranged for my home to be packed up tomorrow." Timothy glanced at Carolyn before answering. "Just getting a head start on the logistics. The Pines has an opening, but we need to move quickly to secure it." "I never agreed to move to the Pines." "Mom, be reasonable," Carolyn interjected. "You can't stay in that house with no access to your funds. The taxes alone. We'll be due in 4 months. which gives me plenty of time to resolve this minor banking issue. I set down my mug with a deliberate click. Timothy, call off the movers. My son sank into an armchair, rubbing his temples. Mom, you're not seeing the bigger picture here. This minor banking issue could be the tip of the iceberg. What if there's an audit? What if they freeze all your assets? You need to downsize now while you still can. I don't need to do anything, I countered. And I certainly don't need to be ambushed and relocated like an unwanted pet. Catherine. Timothy only used my first name when he was trying to establish authority, a tactic that had never worked. We're trying to help you. Can't you see that? What I see is my son making decisions about my home and my belongings without my consent. Because you're not thinking clearly. Timothy's voice rose. You're emotionally attached to that house, I understand, but it's a financial liability now. The smart move is to sell while the market is strong and secure your future with the proceeds. Future is already secure. Not if the government seizes your accounts. Timothy stood, pacing now. Mom, offshore accounts raise red flags. Moving large sums raises even bigger ones. You've potentially exposed yourself to serious consequences, and you don't even seem to grasp the gravity of the situation. I looked from Timothy to Carolyn, seeing the genuine concern in their eyes. They truly believed I was in financial peril. But beneath that concern, I detected something else, a sense of righteousness, of knowing better than their elderly mother. 3 days? I said finally. What? Timothy stopped pacing. Give me 3 days. The bank said the verification process would take 3 to 5 business days. If the accounts aren't unfrozen by then, I'll consider your suggestions. Timothy and Carolyn exchanged glances. Meanwhile, I continued, you will cancel the movers. My home remains exactly as it is until I decide otherwise. Mom, Timothy began. 3 days, Timothy. That's my offer. Carolyn placed a restraining hand on her brother's arm. That's reasonable. The Pines isn't going anywhere, and we can wait 3 more days before making any decisions. Timothy looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Fine. 3 days. But you'll stay here in the meantime where we can keep an eye on you. Keep an eye on me? I repeated incredulously. I'm not a child or an invalid. No, but you're stressed and making rash decisions, he countered. Staying here gives you space to think without the emotional attachment of the house clouding your judgment. I wanted to object further, but exhaustion was settling into my bones. The drive, the confrontation, the betrayal of having my children treat me like an incompetent. It was all catching up to me. Perhaps it was better to stay, to let them believe they were right, for now. Very well, I conceded. I'll stay until the accounts are unfrozen. Carolyn looked relieved. I've taken the week off to help with the transition. We can use this time to look at options, visit the Pines, start planning. What about the movers? I pressed. Timothy sighed. I'll call them off. But Mom, we should at least start sorting through things. That house is full of stuff accumulated over 40 years. Not now, Timothy, Carolyn intervened, seeing my expression. Let's all get some rest, and we can discuss next steps tomorrow. That night, in the sterile guest bedroom of Timothy's apartment, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The bed was top of the line, the sheets Egyptian cotton, but I missed my own familiar surroundings. I thought of the photograph on my bedside table at home, Edward and me on our 30th anniversary, his arm around my shoulders as we stood on a Swiss mountaintop, our faces windburned and jubilant. We had climbed that mountain together, literally and figuratively, building a life and a business from nothing. My phone lit up with a message from Martha. Everything okay? House feels empty without you. I typed back, all fine. Don't worry. We'll call tomorrow. Then I opened my banking app, checking the status of the transfer. Still processing, still frozen. The estimated completion date showed Thursday, exactly 3 days away. I smiled into the darkness. Perfect timing. Just before falling asleep, another message came through, this one from Harold Fleming. Catherine, received your documentation. Everything in order. Flagged for expedited processing. Should be resolved within 72 hours. I set. The phone aside, a plan forming in my mind. Let Timothy and Carolyn believe they were rescuing me from financial ruin. Let them make their plans and their arrangements. In 3 days, they would learn exactly how capable their mother still was. Next morning, I awoke to the sound of voices in the living room. Checking the time, just past 8, I dressed quickly in the clothes I had packed and stepped out to find Timothy, Carolyn, and a stranger seated around the dining table, papers spread before them. "Mom?" Timothy said, looking startled. "We didn't expect you up so early." "Clearly," I replied, eyeing the stranger, a middle-aged woman in a tailored suit. "Who is this?" "Eleanor Katz," the woman said, rising to extend her hand. From Seaside Senior Living, I deliberately ignored the offered hand. "Not the Pines?" Carolyn had the grace to look embarrassed. "The Pines has a 6-month waiting list for the better apartments." Eleanor was explaining some alternatives that have immediate availability. "I canceled the movers as promised," Timothy added quickly. "We're just exploring options." I looked at the brochures spread across the table, glossy photos of various retirement communities, all featuring smiling, gray-haired people engaged in carefully staged activities. My life, neatly packaged into supervised recreation and 3 meals a day in a communal dining room. "Ms. Katz," I said evenly, "I appreciate your time, but this meeting is premature. My children have jump-ed to conclusions about my circumstances." "Mom," Timothy began. "If you'll excuse us," I continued, "this is a family matter." Eleanor gathered her materials with practiced efficiency. "Of course. Here's my card when you're ready to discuss options." She handed it to Carolyn rather than me. Oh, telling choice. After she left, I turned to my children. "What happened to 3 days?" "We're just doing research," Timothy defended. "Being prepared." By inviting a salesperson into a discussion about my future without my knowledge or consent. I moved to the kitchen, desperately needing coffee to face this conversation. Carolyn followed. "Mom, we're trying to help. You don't have to face this alone." "Face what, exactly?" I turned to her, genuinely curious what catastrophe they imagined. "Financial insecurity," she said gently. "Adjusting to a more modest lifestyle. The possibility of legal issues with the accounts." I busied myself with the elaborate coffee machine, hiding my expression. "And you've decided all of this is inevitable based on a temporary account freeze." "It's not just the freeze." Timothy joined us in the kitchen. "It's the pattern we've observed. The expensive maintenance on that old house. The international trips. The declining client base at the domestic branch. While maintaining my offshore investments," I pointed out, "which you knew nothing about until yesterday." "Exactly." He threw up his hands. "Secret accounts? Hidden assets? Mom, do you know how that looks?" Like a woman who managed her own financial affairs without relying on her judgmental children, I thought but didn't say. "You know what I think?" Carolyn said, gentler than her brother. "I think after Dad died, you threw yourself into the business to avoid dealing with the grief. You've been pushing yourself too hard for years, trying to prove something. But Mom, you don't have to anymore. You've earned the right to rest, to let us help shoulder some burdens." Her words hit closer to home than Timothy's accusations. There was some truth in what she said. Edward's death had propelled me into a frenzy of work, of achievement. But not to avoid grief, to transform it into something meaningful. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, "but I need you both to respect my timeline. 3 days. Then we'll talk about next steps based on the actual situation, not your assumptions." Timothy looked ready to argue, but Carolyn nodded. "That's fair. In the meantime, why don't we enjoy having this time together?" When was the last time the three of us spent a few days in the same place without rushing off to meetings or surgeries? And so began my 3 days of captivity in Timothy's sterile apartment, waiting for my financial redemption while my children planned my diminished future. The first full day of my Boston captivity began with the arrival of Timothy's financial advisor, a narrow-faced man named Lawrence Greaves who looked at me with the practiced sympathy reserved for terminal patients. Timothy had apparently scheduled this meeting without informing me, a pattern I was beginning to find insufferable. "Mrs. Sullivan," Greaves said, extending a manicured hand as we settled in Timothy's home office. "I understand you're facing some challenges with your accounts." "Temporary issues," I corrected, ignoring his hand. "Which will resolve themselves shortly." Timothy cleared his throat. "Lawrence has been helping me review what we know about your financial situation, Mom. He has some concerns." "I'm sure he does," I replied dryly, though I fail to see how my finances are any of his concern, or yours for that matter. Greaves opened a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Sullivan, with all due respect, offshore banking raises certain red flags in today's regulatory environment. The IRS has become increasingly aggressive about pursuing—" "Mr. Greaves," I interrupted, "I have filed complete and accurate tax returns every year since 1978. My offshore accounts were established with proper legal guidance, and all earnings have been appropriately reported. But the sudden repatriation of funds is a personal decision as I approach 70, I finished for him, not evidence of wrongdoing." Timothy leaned forward. "Mom, Lawrence is just trying to help us understand the potential risks. If there are issues with back taxes or reporting requirements, there aren't." I stood, smoothing my slacks. "This meeting is over." "Catherine, please," Timothy implored, reverting to my first name again. "This isn't just about you. If there are legal problems, it could affect the family business, Carolyn's reputation, the grandchildren's future." The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "The family business that I built? The grandchildren whose trust funds I established? Those concerns?" Greaves looked uncomfortable, gathering his papers. "Perhaps this isn't the right time. Mrs. Sullivan, when you're ready to discuss your situation more openly, I'd be happy to review your options." "I won't be calling," I assured him. After Greaves departed, Timothy's frustration boiled over. "Why can't you just accept help? You're being completely unreasonable. What's unreasonable is ambushing me with your financial advisor, as if I haven't been managing millions in assets for decades." I moved to the window, gazing out at Boston Harbor in the distance. "You seem to have forgotten who taught you everything you know about wealth management." "That was different," Timothy insisted. "Dad was handling the big picture then. You were just—" He stopped abruptly, but the unspoken words hung in the air. "Just the supportive wife. Just handling the domestic. Client relations. Just following Edward's lead." "Just what, Timothy?" I turned to face him. "Just the woman who expanded Sullivan Financial's client base across 3 continents after your father died? Just the person who grew our assets by 40% when everyone said a widow should sell the business?" Timothy had the grace to look abashed. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "And that's why you'll never understand what I've built, because you still see me as your father's wife, not as the architect of my own success." Before he could respond, Carolyn appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here? I could hear you from the kitchen." "Fine," Timothy muttered. "Mom's just being stubborn about meeting with financial advisors." "I'm being protective of my privacy," I corrected. "A concept this family seems to have abandoned," Carolyn sighed. "Let's take a break from all this. Timothy, you have that lunch meeting downtown. Mom and I could use some time together anyway." After Timothy left, Carolyn suggested we walk to a nearby cafe. It was a crisp autumn day, the Boston Common ablaze with fall colors. As we strolled, I felt some of my tension ease. Unlike Timothy's confrontational approach, Carolyn had always been more diplomatic, though no less determined. I spoke with Martha this morning, Carolyn said as we waited for our coffee. She's quite worried about you. Martha worries too much. She mentioned something interesting. Carolyn studied me carefully. She said you've been making trips to Switzerland every few months for years, not just for client meetings. I maintained a neutral expression. Martha has always had an active imagination. Mom, Carolyn's tone softened. Whatever is going on, you can tell me. I'm not Timothy. I'm not going to judge or take over. For a moment, I considered confiding in her, explaining about the chalet, nestled in the Alps, the quiet life I'd been preparing for my 70s. But Carolyn, for all her compassion, was still operating under the assumption that I was in financial trouble. She would interpret the chalet as another irresponsible expenditure, not as the carefully planned next chapter it represented. There's nothing to tell, I said finally. Just routine business trips. Disappointment flickered across her face. I wish you trusted me more. Trust goes both ways, darling. You arrived in Boston ready to help Timothy dismantle my life based on a misunderstanding. We're worried about you living alone in that big house, making secretive financial moves. Secretive to you, perhaps, not to me. I sipped my coffee. Did it ever occur to either of you to simply ask me about my plans instead of deciding I was incompetent? Carolyn looked genuinely taken aback. We don't think you're incompetent. No? Then why the retirement community brochures? Why the financial advisor? Why am I essentially under house arrest in Timothy's apartment? That's not fair. We're just trying to help. By treating me like a child? By making decisions about my home and my belongings without my consent? I set down my cup. Carolyn, I raised you and Timothy to be independent thinkers, to make your own choices and live with the consequences. I never interfered in your decision to pursue medicine instead of joining the family business. I supported you through 2 divorces without ever saying I told you so. I respected your autonomy. Why can't you respect mine? She was quiet for a long moment. It's different when you're older, is it? Or is that just a convenient excuse to justify control? Mom, financial issues aside, that house is too big for you. The maintenance, the isolation. Is that concern speaking or convenience? It's much easier to visit your mother in a tidy retirement apartment in Boston than to make the trip to Vermont. That hit home. I could see it in her eyes. That's not fair, she repeated, but with less conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you visited the Vermont house, Carolyn? Christmas? 2 years ago? She flushed. I've been busy. The hospital? We're all busy. That doesn't give us the right to rearrange other people's lives to better suit our schedules. The remainder of our walk back to Timothy's apartment was silent, each of us lost in thought. When we arrived, Carolyn headed straight for her laptop, mumbling something about checking patient files remotely. I retreated to the guest room, suddenly exhausted by the constant need to defend myself. My phone buzzed with an email alert from Harold Fleming. The verification process was proceeding smoothly. They'd received additional confirmation from the Swiss bank. The estimated completion time remained Thursday, just 2 more days. I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Another message appeared, this one from Martha. Mrs. S. thought you should know. Timothy's real estate agent came by the house today with photographers. Said they were just taking preliminary photos for your records. I didn't let them in. My hands trembled with anger as I read her words. So Timothy hadn't canceled the preparations to sell my home. He'd simply hidden them from me. I typed back. Thank you, Martha. Don't allow anyone entry without direct confirmation from me. I debated confronting Timothy immediately, but decided against it. Let him believe his deception was working. In 2 days, the balance of power would shift dramatically. That evening, Timothy returned from his meetings looking smug. Good news, Mom. I've found a fantastic estate planning attorney who specializes in resolving offshore banking issues. He can see you tomorrow. I won't be going, I replied calmly, not looking up from the book I was reading. Mom, this isn't optional. You need expert advice to navigate this situation. I marked my page and set the book aside. Tell me, Timothy, did the photographers get good shots of my home today? The ones you sent after promising to cancel all such arrangements? His expression froze. I don't know what you're talking about, Martha called. Nice try, though. Timothy recovered quickly. Fine. Yes, I had preliminary photos taken. It's standard procedure when preparing to list a property. I was just being proactive. Against my explicit wishes. Because your wishes aren't realistic right now. His voice rose in frustration. Mom, I'm trying to protect your assets, what's left of them, before this situation gets worse. Why can't you see that? What I see is a son who lies to his mother's face, I replied coldly. Who makes arrangements behind her back? Who treats her like an incompetent child? I'm treating you like someone who needs help but won't admit it. Timothy ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it momentarily softened my anger. The photos are harmless. They just give us options when, the time comes to sell. The time will not come unless I decide it, I said firmly. And your deception has only convinced me further that I can't trust you with these decisions. Our argument was interrupted by Carolyn's return from an evening walk. She looked between us, sensing the tension. What's happened? Timothy sent photographers to document my home today, after promising to cancel all such arrangements. Carolyn gave her brother a disapproving look. Tim, you said you'd wait the 3 days. I'm just being prepared, he defended. And frankly, I don't think we should wait. Mom is clearly not thinking clearly about her situation. My thinking is perfectly clear, I countered. I simply disagree with your assessment and your methods. Mom, Carolyn intervened, we understand this is difficult. Change always is, but sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing you can do. I looked at my children, both successful, both intelligent, both completely blind to their own condescension. They truly believed they were rescuing me, protecting me from my own poor judgment. The realization was both infuriating and, in an odd way, amusing. They had no idea what was coming. Tell me something, I said quietly. Is this really about my welfare or about protecting what you see as your inheritance? Timothy flinched as if struck. That's a horrible thing to say? Is it? You've never shown this level of interest in my financial decisions before. Now suddenly, when you believe my assets are at risk, you're rearranging my entire life. That's unfair, Mom, Carolyn protested. We care about your security and happiness. My happiness is in Vermont, in the home I shared with your father. Yet you're both determined to remove me from it at the first sign of financial trouble. Because we can't support that lifestyle indefinitely if your accounts remain frozen. Timothy exploded. Do you expect us to pay the property taxes on that mausoleum? To fund your housekeeper and your gardener while you pretend nothing's changed? The truth emerged at last. Timothy wasn't concerned about my welfare, but about the potential burden on his own finances. I nodded slowly, a calm settling over me. I see. Well, you needn't worry. I would never ask either of you for financial support. That's not the point, Carolyn began, but I held up a hand to silence her. I believe it is precisely the point. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm quite tired. We can continue this discussion tomorrow. I retreated to the guest room, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the wall, I could hear my children's muffled voices. Timothy defensive, Carolyn placating. I checked my banking app once more. No change in status, but no delays either. Thursday remained the estimated completion date. Just one more day of this charade. One more day of being treated like a helpless old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs. One more day before I reclaimed my independence, and perhaps adjusted a few inheritance plans in the process. As I prepared for bed, I realized with sudden clarity that this conflict had revealed something crucial about my children, something I might never have discovered otherwise. It wasn't just about money or control. It was about how they fundamentally saw me. Not as the capable, successful woman I had become after Edward's death, but as an aging widow who needed protection from herself. That revelation would shape our relationship long after my accounts were unfrozen, and it would certainly influence the decisions I made about my future, decisions that would now be mine alone. Morning arrived with a soft rain pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Timothy's guest room. I woke early, a lifetime habit that neither retirement nor captivity had changed. Today was Thursday, the day my transfer was scheduled to complete. I checked my banking app immediately, but there was no update yet. The process typically finalized. In the afternoon, Swiss time. A few more hours to endure. I dressed carefully in a cream cashmere sweater and tailored charcoal slacks, clothes that conveyed authority without ostentation. If today unfolded as expected, I wanted to look every inch the capable businesswoman I was when the truth emerged. The apartment was quiet when I emerged. A note on the kitchen counter informed me that Timothy had an early meeting but would return by 11 for my appointment with the estate planning attorney. Carolyn had gone for a run. I was momentarily alone, a perfect opportunity. I made myself coffee and carried it to Timothy's home office. The door was closed but not locked. Inside, his sleek glass desk held a laptop, likely password protected, and several folders. I set down my coffee and began to search methodically. The third drawer yielded what I was looking for, a folder labeled Mother Vermont Property. Inside were printouts of emails between Timothy and a real estate agent named Simone Hargrove, dating back nearly 6 weeks. They discussed preparing the property for market when the time comes and managing the transition sensitively. One email mentioned a ballpark valuation of $2.1–2.4 million depending on updates. 6 weeks. This wasn't a hasty response to my supposedly frozen accounts. This was a long-term plan, only accelerated by the current situation. Timothy had been planning to move me out of my home for months, waiting for the right opportunity. Photographed the emails with my phone, then carefully replaced the folder. Next, I found a slim binder labeled The Pines Mother. Inside was a partially completed application form for the retirement community, with Timothy listed as the responsible financial party. The monthly cost was staggering, nearly $8,000, for the smallest available unit. At the bottom of the form, in Timothy's handwriting, was a note. Discuss liquidating property to create care fund. Estimated need, 10+ years coverage. So there it was. Timothy wasn't just concerned about my supposed financial troubles. He was calculating how to convert my assets into a care fund that would ensure he would never need to support me financially as I aged. I was to be stripped of my home, my independence, and my financial control, all under the guise of helping me. I replaced the binder and continued searching. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found a worn manila envelope containing documents I recognized immediately, copies of Edward's original will and the trust documents established for Timothy and Carolyn. What caught my eye was a yellow sticky note attached to the corner bearing 3 words in Timothy's handwriting. Contestable after incapacitation? Cold anger washed over me. Timothy wasn't just planning for my elder care. He was researching ways to challenge my financial decisions, if he could establish that I was incapacitated. The frozen accounts had given him the perfect opening to suggest I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. I heard the apartment door open and quickly returned everything to its place, slipping out of the office with my coffee cup. Carolyn appeared in running clothes, flushed and damp from the rain. "Morning, Mom," she called, pulling out her earbuds. "You're up early." "Old habits," I replied, my voice remarkably steady despite my racing heart. "How was your run?" "Wet." She laughed, grabbing a towel from a drawer. "But I needed to clear my head." Yesterday was... She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Difficult, I supplied. For all of us. She nodded, studying me. You seem different this morning. More settled. I've had time to think about my situation, I said carefully. About my options. Hope flashed across her face. That's great, Mom. Does that mean you're open to discussing the Pines? Or maybe that apartment complex in Cambridge we mentioned? I'm open to discussing my future, I said, which was true enough. But first, I'd like to show you something. I led her to the living room and took out my phone, pulling up the photos I'd taken of Timothy's notes and emails. Take a look at these. Carolyn scrolled through the images, her expression shifting from confusion to dismay. Where did you get these? Timothy's office. This morning. Mom, you shouldn't have what? Discovered that my son has been planning to sell my home for weeks? That he's been researching ways to challenge my legal competence? My voice remained calm, but with an edge of steel. Tell me, Carolyn, were you part of these discussions? She sat heavily on the sofa. Not the legal research, no. But yes, we've talked about the house. About how it's too much for you, how you'd be safer in a managed community. For 6 weeks, you've been discussing my future without consulting me. We were waiting for the right time, she said weakly, and when my accounts were temporarily frozen, you thought, perfect, now she'll have no choice. Carolyn looked genuinely distressed. It wasn't like that. We were concerned. Were you? Or was it convenient? I sat across from her, maintaining eye contact. Carolyn, I need you to be honest with me. Is this really about my welfare, or about ensuring I don't become a financial burden on either of you? She flushed. That's not fair. The truth rarely is, but I think I deserve it. Don't you? She was quiet for a long moment. It's complicated. Yes, we're worried about you living alone in that big house. Yes, we've discussed what might happen if you needed long-term care. And yes, the cost of that care was part of the discussion. She looked up, her eyes pleading for understanding. But that doesn't mean we don't care about you? I believe you care, I said softly. But caring without respect isn't enough. You and Timothy decided what was best for me without ever asking what I wanted, because you wouldn't have listened. Frustration edged her voice. Mom, you're so stubborn about your independence that you refuse to acknowledge reality. That house is too much. Your health could change overnight, and now with these financial issues... My phone pinged with an alert. I glanced down to see a notification from my banking app. Transfer complete. Funds available. Perfect timing. A slow smile spread across my face. What is it? Carolyn asked, noticing my expression. Reality, I replied, turning the phone to show her the screen. The reality you and Timothy refused to consider. She stared at the notification, then at the balance displayed beneath it. Her eyes widened. Is that 4.2 million? Yes. The transfer from my Swiss account is complete. My accounts are unfrozen. But Timothy assumed. He heard frozen accounts and jumped to the worst possible conclusion. Then you both constructed an entire narrative around my supposed financial incompetence without bothering to get the full story. Carolyn looked stunned. Mom, I don't understand. If you have this kind of money, why didn't you just tell us? Because my finances are my business. Because I've managed them successfully for decades without oversight. And because, frankly, neither of you asked. You decided I was in trouble and needed rescuing, period. The apartment door opened, and Timothy strode in, briefcase in hand. Traffic was brutal. Let me just change for the attorney and... He stopped, sensing the tension in the room. What's going on? Wordlessly, I held out my phone, displaying the transfer notification and account balance. Timothy took it, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. This can't be right, he muttered. The accounts were frozen. Temporarily, for a routine verification, exactly as I told you from the beginning. But 4 million? He looked up, his face pale. Where did this come from? From 20 years of international client development. From investments your father and I made decades ago. From my work, not yours, not your father's, mine. Timothy sank into a chair, still clutching my phone. Why didn't you tell us you had this kind of money offshore? Why would I? When have either of you shown interest in my business affairs except to criticize or dismiss them? Carolyn at least had the grace to look ashamed. Timothy, however, quickly shifted to defensiveness. You should have told us, he insisted. All this could have been avoided if you'd just been transparent about your finances. Transparent? I laughed incredulously. Like you were transparent about planning to sell my home? About researching ways to challenge my competence? His head snapped up. What are you talking about? I gestured to Carolyn, who reluctantly showed him the photos on her phone. He scanned them, his expression hardening. You went through my private papers? He demanded. Yes, I admitted without apology. After discovering you'd been lying to me about canceling the real estate preparations. That's different. I was trying to help you. By researching how to contest my will after having me declared incapacitated? I raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting definition of help. Timothy flushed dark red. That was just contingency, planning, in case your condition deteriorated. My condition? I repeated coldly. I'm not ill, Timothy. I'm not mentally impaired. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, as today's events clearly demonstrate. An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Carolyn spoke. So what happens now? She asked quietly. I stood, straightening my shoulders. Now I return to my home in Vermont. I continue living my life on my terms, and you both gain a valuable lesson in making assumptions. Mom, be reasonable, Timothy began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. No. For days I've listened to you both tell me what's reasonable. Now you'll listen to me. I looked between them, my voice firm but not unkind. I love you both. You are my children, and nothing changes that. But this experience has shown me that our relationship needs boundaries. What does that mean? Carolyn asked anxiously. It means I will no longer tolerate being treated like an incompetent child. It means decisions about my home, my finances, and my future remain solely mine to make. And it means there will be consequences for the kind of deception I've uncovered here. Timothy shifted uncomfortably. Consequences? Yes. I met his gaze directly. I'll be reviewing my estate planning when I return home. The trust terms for the grandchildren remain unchanged, but my personal assets... I let the sentence hang unfinished. The threat landed precisely as intended. Timothy paled visibly, while Carolyn looked stricken. Mom, we were just worried about you, she insisted. We never meant... Your intentions aren't the issue, I interrupted gently. Your actions are, and actions have consequences. So this is punishment, Timothy said bitterly. You're using your money to control us, just like you always have. I regarded him with genuine surprise. Is that what you think? That financial support equates to control? What else would you call it? Do as I say or risk your inheritance. How is that not manipulation? Timothy, I said quietly. Everything you have, your education, your position at the firm, the seed money for your first home, came from my support. Not because I sought to control you, but because I loved you and wanted you to succeed. If you view that as manipulation, perhaps the problem lies with your perception, not my intentions. He had no response to that, staring down at his hands. I turned to Carolyn. I'll be calling a car service to take me home this afternoon. I'd like to leave by 3. I'll drive you, she offered immediately. I considered her offer. Unlike Timothy, Carolyn seemed genuinely remorseful. Thank you. I'd appreciate that. As I moved toward the guest room to pack my few belongings, Timothy finally found his voice again. Mom, wait. He stood, his expression a complex mixture of embarrassment, frustration, and wounded pride. What about the attorney? He's expecting us at 11. Call and cancel, I replied simply. I have my own legal counsel in Burlington, who has managed my affairs competently for years. And the estate planning review you mentioned? Are you serious about that? I paused in the doorway, considering my response carefully. The hurt and betrayal I felt was real, but so was my love for my children. That depends on what happens next, Timothy. On whether this experience teaches you anything about respect and trust. With that, I left him standing in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed plans for my future. Plans that had never included asking what I actually wanted. In the guest room, I methodically packed my suitcase, a sense of calm purpose replacing the simmering anger of the past few days. I checked my banking app again, simply for the pleasure of seeing the completed transfer confirmed. Then I called Martha to share the good news. They found out about the money then, she asked, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Just now. I'm coming home this afternoon. I'll have everything ready, she promised. And Mrs. Sullivan? I'm glad you showed them. Sometimes children need to be reminded who's still in charge. I smiled at her loyalty. Indeed they do, Martha. Indeed they do. As I finished packing, I reflected on the past 3 days. They had been unpleasant, even painful at times, but also revelatory. I had seen my children clearly, their assumptions, their condescension, their fear of responsibility, and they had finally seen me, not as their aging mother who needed protection, but as a woman who had built something substantial entirely on her own terms. Whether this new understanding would heal or further fracture our relationship remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. I would return to Vermont not as a defeated old woman being displaced from her home, but as the architect of my own future, whatever form it might take. The drive back to Vermont with Carolyn was mostly silent. The rain had stopped, leaving the autumn landscape glistening in late afternoon sunlight. Neither of us seemed eager to reignite the morning's confrontation, so we let the miles pass with only occasional comments about the scenery or the traffic. About an hour into the journey, Carolyn finally broke the meaningful silence. I owe you an apology, Mom. I turned from watching the countryside roll by. Yes, you do. She glanced at me, surprised by my directness, then nodded. You're right. I should have asked you directly about your finances instead of making assumptions. I should have advocated for your independence instead of joining Timothy's intervention. Why didn't you? I asked, genuinely curious. Carolyn had always been the more thoughtful of my two children, less impulsive than her brother. She considered the question carefully before answering. I think I was afraid. Of you aging. Of you possibly struggling alone, of having to make difficult decisions later if your situation deteriorated suddenly. She sighed. It was easier to believe Timothy's narrative that you needed help now than to face the uncertainty of the future. Her honesty was refreshing after days of manipulation and half-truths. Fear makes us behave in ways we later regret, I acknowledged. But Carolyn, I'm not in denial about aging. I've been actively planning for my future, my actual future, not the diminished version Timothy envisioned for me. The Swiss trips, she said, understanding dawning in her voice. Martha was right. They weren't just for business. I smiled faintly. No, I bought a chalet in the Alps last year. A small, manageable property near Interlaken. I've been preparing it as a second home, a place to spend half the year once I turn 70. Carolyn's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You bought a house in Switzerland and didn't tell us? After the past few days, are you really surprised I kept it private? She had no response to that. I've been simplifying my international holdings, I continued, consolidating accounts, establishing local management for my remaining European clients. Not because I'm in financial trouble, but because I'm planning for a life that balances work, which I still enjoy, with the leisure I've earned. Why Switzerland? Your father and I spent our 5th anniversary there, hiking in the mountains. It was one of the happiest times of our marriage. I gazed out at the passing New England forests. He always talked about returning when we retired. I'm finally fulfilling that dream, for both of us. We fell silent again, each processing the conversation in our own way. As we crossed the Vermont state line, Carolyn spoke again. I am sorry, Mom, truly, and I understand if you need time before you can fully trust me again. Thank you. I reached over and briefly touched her hand. That means more than you know. The familiar landscape of my Vermont town appeared as we crested a hill. The late afternoon sun bathed the colonial buildings in golden light, and the mountains beyond were a tapestry of crimson and amber. Home. Despite everything, my heart lifted at the sight. Martha was waiting on the porch as we pulled into the driveway, her round face lighting up when she saw me. She hurried down the steps as Carolyn parked, reaching the car before I could even open my door. Mrs. Sullivan! Thank goodness you're back. She pulled me into a brief, uncharacteristic hug, then stepped back, embarrassed by her own display of emotion. Everything's ready inside. I made your favorite soup and there's fresh bread from Wilson's Bakery. Thank you, Martha. I squeezed her hand gratefully. It's good to be home. She eyed Carolyn with undisguised suspicion as my daughter retrieved my suitcase from the trunk. Will Dr. Carolyn be staying? Just long enough to bring in my bag, I replied, loud enough for Carolyn to hear. She has a flight back to Chicago this evening. Hurt flashed across Carolyn's face, quickly masked by understanding. She nodded, accepting the boundary I'd established. I should head back soon if I'm going to make it to Boston in time. Inside, the house welcomed me with familiar scents and textures, lemon polish on the walnut banisters, lavender sachets in the linen closets, the subtle aroma of Martha's vegetable soup simmering in the kitchen. After the sterile modernity of Timothy's apartment, it felt wonderfully, authentically mine. Carolyn set my suitcase down in the foyer, looking around with new eyes. I'd forgotten how beautiful this place is, she said softly. How much of you? And Dad is in every corner. Yet you were ready to help Timothy pack it all away, I observed without malice. She winced. I was wrong. This is your home, and it suits you perfectly. She hesitated, then added, Would you show me some of your plans for Switzerland before I go? If you're comfortable sharing them, that is. The request surprised me, a gesture of interest in my future, rather than an attempt to control it. Come. To my study, I said after a moment's consideration. In the book-lined room that had been Edward's sanctuary and later mine, I opened my laptop and pulled up photographs of the Swiss chalet. It was nothing grand. A traditional 2-bedroom structure with weathered wooden balconies and red shutters, nestled on a small plot overlooking Lake Thun. Mountains rose dramatically behind it, their peaks snow-capped even in summer. It's beautiful, Carolyn said, genuine admiration in her voice. I can see why you love it. I'll be spending April through September there, starting next year, I explained. The rest of the time I'll be here. I've arranged for local property management in both places during my absence. You've thought of everything, she murmured. That's what independence requires. Thorough planning, not denial of reality. I closed the laptop. I've never been in denial about aging, Carolyn. I've simply refused to let it diminish me before its time. She nodded slowly. I understand that now. She glanced at her watch reluctantly. I should go if I'm going to make my flight. The door. She turned to face me one last time. Mom, about Timothy. That's between Timothy and me, I interrupted gently but firmly. You don't need to mediate. I know, but... She hesitated. He's hurt and embarrassed right now, but he does love you. In his own controlling, misguided way. I know that, I assured her. Love and respect aren't always aligned, unfortunately. She nodded, then impulsively hugged me. I'll do better, she whispered. I promise. After she left, I wandered through the house, reacquainting myself with my own space after the brief but jarring displacement. In the kitchen, Martha had set the table for one, with a bowl of steaming soup and a glass of my favorite Chablis. You should eat while it's hot, she urged, ever practical. There'll be plenty of time for everything else tomorrow. I smiled gratefully and sat down. Has Timothy called? Twice, she confirmed with a hint of satisfaction. I told him you were traveling and would return his calls when you were ready. Perfect. I savored a spoonful of soup, Martha's specialty, rich with root vegetables from my garden. I'll deal with him tomorrow. And the estate planning review. You mentioned to Dr. Carolyn? Martha asked, her tone carefully neutral. She had been with me long enough to speak freely on such matters. I considered the question. The hurt and betrayal I'd felt in Boston remained, but the drive home with Carolyn had begun a healing process. I'll speak with Richard Garvey next week, I said, referring to my longtime attorney. Some adjustments may be necessary, but nothing drastic. Family is still family, even when they disappoint you. Martha nodded approvingly. Very wise, Mrs. Sullivan. After dinner, I carried my wine to the back terrace. The evening was crisp, but not cold, the sky ablaze with stars visible only away from city lights. I settled into my favorite Adirondack chair, the same one where Edward and I had spent countless evenings planning our future together. My phone buzzed with a text from Timothy. Mom, please call when you can. We should talk. I set the phone aside without responding. There would be time for that conversation tomorrow, or perhaps the next day. For now, I needed this moment of peace, this reassertion of my rightful place in my own life. The following morning, I woke refreshed in my own bed for the first time in days. After breakfast, I called Harold Fleming to confirm that all restrictions on my accounts had been lifted and to discuss the next steps in my financial reorganization. Everything's in order, Catherine, he assured me. The verification process was completed without any issues, as expected. The funds are fully accessible. Excellent. And the trust amendments we discussed last month? The documents are prepared. I can email them for your review today. He paused, then added carefully, I must say I was surprised to hear from your son last week. I hadn't realized you were involving your children in these decisions. I wasn't, I replied dryly. Timothy took some unfortunate initiatives based on incomplete information. Ah. Harold's diplomatic tone conveyed perfect understanding. Well, I'm glad everything's been clarified. Will you be proceeding with the Swiss property management arrangements we discussed? Yes, with one modification. I'd like to add a small cabin on the property, a guest house suitable for family visits. Despite everything, I couldn't help smiling at the thought of my grandchildren experiencing the Alps as I once had with Edward. Family disappointments didn't erase my love for Timothy's children or Carolyn's son. After finishing with Harold, I checked my email to find a message from Timothy, with the subject line, apology. I opened it with cautious curiosity. Mom, it began, I don't know where to start. I've spent the night thinking about everything that happened, everything I said and did. I was wrong, not just about your finances, but about trying to take control of your life. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was protecting what I thought was my inheritance. It was selfish and disrespectful, and I'm deeply sorry. I've canceled the real estate assessments and attorney appointments. I've also removed myself as signatory from your accounts at First Vermont Bank, an arrangement I now realize was unnecessary and intrusive. I understand if you need time before we can rebuild trust. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Love, Timothy. I read the email twice, weighing its sincerity. The practical steps he'd taken to undo his interference suggested genuine remorse. It was a start, though not an immediate solution. My phone rang. The special ringtone I'd assigned to my oldest grandchild, Timothy's 16-year-old daughter, Emma. Grandma? Her voice was tentative when I answered. Are you okay? Dad said there was some confusion about your finances, but he wouldn't explain properly. I smiled at her concern. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Oh. She sounded relieved. Good. Because I told Dad you're the most together person I know, and if he messed things up with you, he'd better fix it fast. My heart warmed at her loyalty. Did you really say that? Yep. He looked pretty shocked, actually. She laughed, then grew serious again. But you're really okay? Better than okay, I assured her. In fact, I'm planning something special. Trip next summer. How would you feel about visiting Switzerland? I have a little house in the mountains there. Her excited response confirmed what I already knew, that family bonds, while sometimes strained, were worth preserving and nurturing. Timothy and Carolyn had disappointed me deeply, but their children represented the future of our family. Emma's unquestioning faith in my competence was a reminder that respect could be rebuilt across generations. Later that afternoon, I walked through my garden, assessing what needed attention after my brief absence. The maple tree where Timothy and Carolyn had played as children stood resplendent in autumn glory, its leaves a fiery canopy against the blue Vermont sky. Martha had mentioned that Timothy used to climb that tree constantly, despite my warnings about the danger. He had always been determined to reach the highest branches, to prove he could achieve what others thought impossible. Perhaps that same determination had driven his recent actions, a misguided attempt to protect what he valued, even at the cost of my autonomy. Understanding didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me place it in the context of our complicated history. I pulled my phone from my pocket and typed a response to his email. Timothy, I received your apology. The breach of trust was significant, but not irreparable. I'll be in Boston next month for the Sullivan Financial Board meeting. We can have dinner afterward and begin rebuilding what was damaged. In the meantime, I've scheduled a family gathering at Christmas, here, in my home. I expect you to attend with the children. Some traditions are worth preserving, even after disappointments. As I sent the message, a sense of completion settled over me. The past few days had been among the most challenging of my life, forcing me to defend my competence and independence against those I loved most. But they had also clarified what mattered to me: my home, my autonomy, my carefully crafted future, and yes, my family, despite their flaws. At 68, I had faced attempts to diminish and displace me, and I had emerged stronger for it. My offshore transfer had completed not just financially, but symbolically, bringing home the resources I had built and the independence I had earned. Whatever came next, Switzerland, family reconciliation, new business ventures, I would face it on my terms, in my time. The maple leaves danced in a sudden breeze, scattering golden light across the lawn. I breathed deeply, savoring the crisp Vermont air and the profound satisfaction of standing exactly where I belonged, in the life I had created for myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.